Drive a truck to a place, and when you get there, it's another place. Everybody drive a truck. Everybody drive a truck to a place.
It's trucks.
It's trucks. It's trucks number 2. We're
Trucks.
continuing to do the trucks.
Yes.
And
Is
today's...
there any like stuff we should say that's important that we didn't say in the last episode about it being a new season? Anything we need to express?
do you have anything in mind?
No, I completely, I'm maintaining character here in that I've completely failed to think of this just before right now.
Spontaneity is always the soul of trucks. I don't know. Did we mention that we're on iTunes last time? Because we actually are.
We
on
are
iTunes
on iTunes
now.
now. That is an important thing actually to mention. Yes, we
So
are
you
on
can-
iTunes when we have all the things. I'll share some links in the description.
Absolutely.
I'm taking a right on a red turn and it's not legal, and I don't
You
know
can
why, but that's okay.
Subscribe to us on so many different channels.
Yeah, man.
We should reiterate that if you want to continue to watch Trucks, you should subscribe to the Trucks channel, because we won't be cross-posting this to both channels forever.
Yep.
On account
Yep.
of how Josh wants to keep his channel purely
just-
Josh-focused.
Not purely Josh
eventually.
focused, but not just all trucks.
Exactly.
When you're
People-
putting trucks can get very outputty, and it's nice to have that in its own place.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, I hope we can get pretty outputty.
Yeah.
You may also notice that it is some weeks since the last Trucks now, and that's probably going to be the norm going forward, rather
Yeah.
than the weekly Trucks that you may or may not have gotten used to.
We don't have a schedule yet. We probably will at some point, but it'll probably be every 2 or 3 weeks, something like that.
Hmm.
So that's there. There you go. That's the trucks update.
Yeah.
Everyone's up to speed now. Let's talk about some video games.
Sure. Would you like to take the video game helm first, or shall I take the video game helm first?
I think you've been playing more interesting new stuff than I have lately. I've just been playing Monster Hunter. I've been revisiting Trials, which I've already talked about. But I do know that you've been playing a lot of kind of masochistic type games, so maybe...
Well, I mean, kind of. Like, I have been very unbusy on account of not being able to move around very much, which has led to a lot of video game playing. The most interesting new games that I've played have been Iconoclasts and Celeste, with Celeste being slightly more interesting than Iconoclasts. And I had a lot of things to say about Celeste's difficulty curve, because Celeste is a game which is about getting over depression, essentially, via hard work and perseverance.
Okay.
And integrating your shadow, which is literally a purple-haired version of you in the game,
Okay.
which you fight with and then cooperate with. But by the time that you get to that point, the game is ludicrously difficult. And so if you are of a, not sticking to it kind of vein, you probably will have stopped playing the game by that point. And then Mark Brown put out a video, and if you are not familiar with Mark Brown, he does a video series called The Game Maker's Toolkit, which is very good.
Yeah, very solid stuff.
And very British, which always helps me. I don't know about you, but I find it easier to absorb ideas when they're said in a British accent.
He did such a goofy thing in his latest video, the one you're talking about, where unrelated to the substance of the point, but where he went right at the end when he gets out his big thesis statement. Some very clever, very solid formulation of the entire debate on like game difficulty. He just followed us up immediately with, "I just came up with that. I'm so clever," which like massively distracts from whatever it was he said before that.
That was a callback, Josh.
It
To
was
a
a
joke
callback?
earlier in the video. Yeah, he said, "Oh, somebody said this clever thing. I'm going to steal that." Like several months before that.
Either way, it made
See, that was rewarding you for paying attention, is what that was.
I failed to pay attention. I failed the video. I wasn't good enough at the video.
Oh man, maybe he should offer difficulty settings on his own discourse.
Yeah.
Thank God
Closed
we
captions
don't
that
do
explain the jokes.
that. Man, we would totally do that if that didn't constitute more work for you. And Josh's realms of perseverance are distinct.
That would be a lot of work explaining all
be.
the,
It would
how
just be- it would
most
just
of
be a
these
lot of
jokes
work.
don't merit explanations.
I know
I'd have to-
we'd only need to do it on special occasions when we, roll out something particularly neat that we don't want.
like
folks to
integrating
miss.
the shadow. I'll put a caption under that says that's some Jungian stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think people who watch us know who Young is. For Christ's sake, I mean, we're not entry level here. This isn't, Trucks 101. We're
I'm sure not. I'm
graduate-level
sure
trucks.
everybody who watches this knows who Young is, but that doesn't mean they all know enough about him to recognize every reference to him.
Well, I certainly hope that they go out and do some research. If there's
Yeah.
anything that you
Isaac
don't...
just said integrating the shadow. I'm gonna Google that phrase.
Exactly. I'm sure there are some people who do that. If there's anything that you don't understand about trucks, please visit your local library. But anyway, back to my point. So as you mentioned, this Mark Brown video is about difficulty in video games, which is a subject that we have touched upon many a time over the history of trucks,
One of my favorite subjects.
because we are all about the major question that Mark Brown posits in this video. Because on the one hand, we believe that if video games are art, which we are pretty much, committed to the idea that in fact they are, as are most right-thinking people at this point, then it's important that they be presented in the manner in which they were intended to be presented. Although, of course, there's another layer of discourse about the death of the author on top of that, which Mark Brown did not
Go into.
go into, which we may get into later. But regardless, if you should present your work as you intended to present it, rather than making concessions for the audience if you're trying to make high art rather than commercial art.
Yeah,
That's
but on the other
generally-
side of the coin, it's important to consider that not everybody will be. It's important to make it so that people can actually play your fucking game.
Accessibility in video games is way more of a hard limit than it is in stuff like music or literature.
Yeah.
Because even if you are, even if you have a hard time following somebody's words, or listening to their music sounds like noise, you can at least still listen to / read it.
Right.
Whereas if you don't have the physical capability to do split-second platforming, you're just not going to get that far in Celeste.
Right. Or even
and
not
s-
like the physical capability. Like disabilities are a part of it, but it's also just like you don't need more than the length of the noise song's length, in terms of patience to get through that thing.
Yeah. but
Whereas for a hard video
it could take
game,
you anywhere from like an hour to 5 hours to get through a particular point in a game, which plays incidentally merry hell with the pacing that the person who designed the game was thinking that you would have.
Yeah, maybe
Um,
unless the repetition are the idea, I suppose. But
Well, the repetition might be the idea, but still the amount of repetition involved is going to vary from player to player.
yeah.
So the solution that people have historically come up with for this is to provide an easy mode. But as
Right.
Brown points out, the difficulty with the easy mode is that it adds a completely different sort of narrative spin to what you're experiencing if you think that you're on easy mode. Also, if it's presented as like a default option, that has a different narrative heft than it is. If you're playing Wolfenstein and it like is poopy diaper mode, as opposed to assist mode, which is what it's referred to in Celeste,
Yeah.
you're going to come away with a different feeling about what was intended.
Right.
So I played Celeste and I was like, this is really, really hard. I wonder whether it's going to reach, the people that it wants to reach, because unless you're like a really platforming, centered person with a lot of experience, this is going to be incredibly frustrating for you.
For the record, it does seem to be doing at least pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, just in terms of like getting to the story, like you can go
Right.
into, you of course can go into this is actually a really useful tool for discussing like how audiences recognize a thing, is going into global achievement stats in
Right.
Steam and seeing how many people got past the first level versus how many people got past the second level. You know, like what your
And those numbers
what,
are always surprisingly low, even in easy games. But I imagine in a game like Celeste, they have to be even
no,
lower.
I think it actually has a relatively standard curve. It does Celeste, you know,
Really?
but it's interesting. It's an interesting tool to talk about like audience retention, regardless. Like, I mean, there's going to be a certain number of people who peel off after the first level because they're like, okay, I get what this game is doing, and I'm not really interested. But also, you know, there's going to be a certain number of people who continue to persevere after that point, but who drop off later because they just can't do it.
Sure.
Now, I was going to be like, well, it's it's an interesting narrative choice to have this. You can triumph over your own self just via determination narrative in a game that's so punishing. But after the fact and after watching this Mark Brown video, I realized that I had never even considered turning on the assist mode.
Did you just completely forget that it existed?
I just completely forgot that it existed, even though it's right there in the menu every time you start the game.
So how does this affect your take on the game?
Well, I mean, my take was like this may be a certain amount of dissonance, ludonarrative dissonance, because there are it is correct I mean, it frames like this journey of self-integration as being an extremely difficult one, which requires a lot of false starts, which is, entirely in keeping with the game, but it felt to me like it went overboard with that. On the other hand, the assist mode adds a completely different wrinkle to that, because the important thing about the assist mode is that when you go to turn it on, it says, try playing the game with this off first. Like that's like the first piece of text that you see when you try to turn it on, is essentially like, we put together the game the way that it was put together for a reason. Please go and make sure that you, and experience the game as it was meant to be experienced, just to give you some context,
Yeah.
And then it gives you this incredibly, like, granular, nuanced options for how to make the game easier. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't decide how to make the game easier for you. It allows you to address the particular things that you were having trouble with. Like, you can give yourself invincibility, or you can just turn down the speed of the game a little bit. Or you can, give yourself more in-air jumps. Or,
That's pretty nifty.
there's like a panoply of options that are essentially there so that you can choose exactly how hard the game would be to make it like satisfyingly difficult for you. They say, please understand that like we're trying to make this a satisfyingly difficult experience. Play the game as it is first so that you understand what we're going for, and then if what we have landed on here for you is not satisfyingly difficult but way too difficult, adjust accordingly.
Could you elaborate on the point of ludonarrative dissonance in this case? Because you say that it obviously, the difficult process of self-actualization and the difficulty of the game do work together, but it just goes overboard. How can you talk about how that produces a dissonance?
I suppose it doesn't so much produce a dissonance as that it doesn't actually produce a dissonance in those terms. What it does is that it prevents you from actually accessing that theme.
Okay.
Because the bits of the game that are
only feel defeat.
tell
If
you
you
that-
only feel defeat, you're not going to experience that.
I mean,
that catharsis, I suppose.
there's that part of it, but there's also like the bits of the game story which explicitly develop these themes are locked behind a lot of very difficult platforming.
I see.
You're up to like maybe after level 3 before the game really starts to get into that. It's the story has sort of a long, slow build in it to get to the thematic meat of it.
So
And,
it's not dissonance so much as it might just completely fail to develop a narrative before the point you give up on it.
Exactly. Like it's not even like dissonant, you're right, because because what the game is and what it says do make very good sense together regardless. It's a matter of like you may never even get to the point where it's telling you what
becomes
it's telling
clear.
you.
Yeah.
If you're not able to make some tweaks.
That's interesting.
And it's a really satisfying platformer. There are a few like issues with it as a game. It has like a certain number of worlds, and all of those worlds focus on different gimmick. And at least for me, like some of those gimmicks are way more like enjoyable as a gameplay experience than others of those gimmicks.
I have heard that the integration of those gimmicks is clever. I've heard a lot of praise for the level design. Someone told me that it's as if your Metroidvania power set is just expressed in the levels instead of in your character, and kind of one power at a time rather than an accumulative process.
Yeah, there is something to that. Yeah. I think that may be overselling it. I mean, at bottom, it's like the different worlds have different environmental challenges.
Sure.
And like they each have, maybe 3 or 4 different environmental things that you have to figure out how they work that are, more or less, that are, some of it's transferred thematically or, in terms of how you're meant to deal with them to other worlds, and some of them aren't. I found some of those just a great deal more fun to engage with than others,
Sure.
which is, not ideal. Like, for example, world number 3 focuses a lot on moving obstacles, which, for whatever reason, I find like rewards trial and error way more than it does, thinking ahead, because there's only maybe it's just because I'm not that bright, but there's only a limited amount of thinking ahead that you can do when there's that many objects in motion on the playing field, and so you sort of just keep trying until you hit the right point in the cycle.
Right.
As opposed to in World 2, where the gimmick is that you have these big sort of blocks of jelly, which if you dash into them, you whoosh all the way to the other side and pop out the other end, which is just tremendously fun in and of itself.
Yeah.
It feels whooshy, and you get to spend a lot of time in the air whooshing between bits and places. So if I had a criticism of the game, it would be that not all the gimmicks are created equal, and it kind of blows its most enjoyable gimmick relatively early on in the game. But that may be just me, as opposed to
Sure.
an objective standard of fun.
It sounds worth playing. I want to check this game out.
You should. It's really pretty looking. The music
Seems
is good,
up my alley.
and it's very hard.
Yep, that's me. There you go.
Yeah.
The conversation around these highly difficult games has been so active lately. I mean, that Mark Brown video too is very self-aware of the fact that it's an entry into a conversation which has almost been played out to the point of tedium at this point.
Yeah,
But it continues to intrigue me nonetheless.
I think that, I certainly haven't heard his particular take on it expounded before, which is that, you should have an easy mode. You just have to be very careful about how you present your easy mode.
Yeah.
And like, you should make an effort to make your easy mode robust.
Yeah, it was a good, smart take. Very, very well worth it. But you hear a lot of the same things over and over as well, which is a shame, because I think there's, despite us doing so many trucks on these sorts of games by now, I think there's still plenty more to go into. Like last time we attempted this trucks, before you realized that your take on Celeste was, maybe not fully formed.
Because I had forgotten about the existence of the assist mode completely, having never tried it.
We had a little conversation about getting over it, and we had different takes on getting over it. But the sticking point in that conversation was how much is really going on in that game, I think. Yeah. And that got me thinking a little bit. And I've decided that a point getting over it makes, like, one of the things that's interesting about that game outside of its, or tangential to its high difficulty, is how it presents a different mode for a game to be didactic. You don't play many games where the creator of the game is just there explaining the intentions all the time. But this thing with Celeste is like kind of adding some additional perspective to that, which is that there's something inherently more didactic about hard games. Would you agree with that statement? It feels like a game.
I mean, certainly, like, it's being taught is about being challenged,
right.
Just sort of as a general matter. But like a game that a game that's that hard also has to justify its own existence, or else it'll stop.
Right. And
You know.
it's also just that a game that insists on being that hard can't help but be very particular about what it's trying to be, whereas an easy game can be more things to more people, maybe.
I mean, I think that's true for. Oh, so it's not like didactic that you're necessarily saying. It's more a matter of specificity.
Yeah, I guess you could say that, yeah. I mean, I think
Um,
there's a didactic quality that comes with it, but you're right that that's not really the main thing that I'm trying to get at here.
Is a hard game insists that you play it a very specific way, and therefore that collapses the number of ways that you can read it.
Yeah, and maybe it collapses the 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 breadth of experiences that it's possible to have with it.
Yeah, I would say
Not
that's
all the
probably
way.
true.
I'm going to say there's definitely more than one way to engage with difficulty, but I think there's probably far more ways to engage with just like maybe a narrative or something like about visuals.
Yeah, I mean the the fact is that even though there may be different ways to play the hardest games, once you've reached that level of fluency, the experience that people will have getting to that level of fluency is pretty much going to be the same no matter what.
Right.
Of course, adjusting for skill, but even like the most skilled players, when they're playing the most difficult games, are going to be spending a fair amount of time just bashing their head into it until they've achieved familiarity.
Yeah. I had an experience the other night playing Trials, the motorcycle game. I think we did a Mumble Squad on this way back in the day, did we?
We did.
To summarize very briefly, it is a motorcycle game where everything's very physical. You have to both feather the accelerator and your brakes and lean back and forth on the bike to get over obstacles. It gets very hard very fast. And I've been playing a bit more of this. This game is a standby for me. And it struck me, just a side point, it struck me how much this game actually has in common with getting over its sense of humor.
Slapstick.
But yeah, slapstick, the physical comedy of errors kind of thing. Which maybe it sounds like is something that all hard games might share in common, but it really isn't. Like N++ doesn't have that.
Well,
but anyway,
it does sort of, but yeah.
sort of, definitely not to the same
I mean, the
cartoonish.
The funny thing in Trials and the funny thing in Getting Over It is sudden unwanted acceleration, which is not really the way that it goes in N++. But yeah.
There's accidental backflips in Trials too. Something Getting Over It is sadly lacking. But
You can't
yeah.
really invert yourself in Getting Over It.
I had a moment where I was like doing a hard user-made level that I'd once played a long, long time ago, and thinking, wow, I'm like flying through this. I'm like better than I was before. This is cool. And then I got to what it later dawned on me was the obstacle I'd gotten stuck on the first time I'd tried this level, and I just got stuck on it again. And like the game keeps a counter of how many times you've retried, so I know for a fact that over 150 times I struggled to just climb up a very steep wall and got nowhere. Just got on the wall, couldn't get my wheels on it properly, and fell down again. And like the moment of really coming face to face with what I was sitting there doing, just watching this motorcyclist fail in exactly the same way, well, subtly different variations on the same way of failing, over and over and over and over and over again for an hour. Like a very peculiar kind of self-awareness came over me in that moment, where I became just very aware of myself as a man in a room watching a motorcyclist fail on a screen and being connected to that failure. And then like I loaded up another custom level and got stuck on it too, and watched my past self clear the level with like just as much struggle as I put into it, and struggle with the final obstacle over and over and over again until he realized that there was a trick to it. Like literally, my past self made a mistake, got the back of my bike in a peculiar little hole, which caused my bike to become a rocket ship, which I was able to just fly to the end. And I don't know, man. Yeah, you encounter yourself when you play these things. You encounter your past self, and maybe your future self.
Well, I mean, we shouldn't need to be reminded of the experience of failure.
No.
It's the experience of eventual success that's alien. The
Oh, but the reason I wanted to bring up Trials, I just remembered, is that you were talking about how Celeste has a narrative about this kind of effort being a sort of self-therapy. And honestly, like the other night I was having a pretty bad bout of anxiety, and it was in fact just parking myself in front of this horrible motorcycle experience that calmed me down. So
that makes
there's
sense.
something accurate about that angle, I guess.
I mean, it does make your brain shift gears.
Yeah.
Um, I was I was told the other day by a person who'd experienced trauma that it is genuinely therapeutically suggested that after you experience something traumatic, like as quickly as possible, after you experience something traumatic, you should play Tetris. And there because that makes your brain shift gears and prevents it from doing the job that it is designed to do, which is to lay in the traumatic memory to prevent you from doing it again. Like to record that memory in that part of your storage. If you want to avoid developing a trigger around something, you have to like immediately distract yourself in a really like structural way, activate different parts of your brain.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, and I think I mean, as far as like the actual utility of games like this, I think that interrupting self-reinforcing patterns by forcibly kicking yourself into a different mode is like a big deal.
Hmm.
But yeah, so an interesting wrinkle on the sort of the didactic element as far as getting over it is concerned is, you know, you were saying it's interesting that like you don't usually hear developers talking about what the game means all the time while you're playing it. And of course, what Bennett is talking about is not actually necessarily what the game means in getting over it.
Not necessarily, no.
It's what he was thinking when he made it, but
Right.
his recounting this to you serves two purposes, and one of those purposes I think closer to what the game is actually about.
How do you
The
mean?
second purpose of which is to infuriate you, rather than to communicate.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, infuriating is communication, intentional.
yes, no, but it is communication on of the second order. It is not about what is being said; it's about how it's being said.
True that.
Um,
We are getting pretty close to our destination. We can
Cool.
stall for time, but did you have a point you were hoping to get out before this was over?
Now, I mean, having mentioned Iconoclast, I should maybe do a little bit of gloss on it because I was going to connect it to the Celeste thing because one of the things that I felt about Iconoclast was it was not a particularly difficult game, but it felt like jankily designed in a number of ways. And part of this was the particular way in which the difficulty was laid out, like the lack of checkpoints. And again, it only occurred to me belatedly that it gave me right up front an option to play on normal or hard, and I chose hard and never thought about it. Because that kind of game is a game that will bore me if I play it on normal.
Sure.
And so, you know, I can't tell you for certain whether that's just poor design or poor hard mode design in that particular game. Because
For
it's
hard
not
mode design, definitely a thing.
yeah,
Just finding a way, like finding a number you can turn up, a dial you can adjust on a game to make it more difficult isn't always going to result in a better experience. And I say that as someone who, you know, always prefers the game to be more difficult than less difficult.
there's a bit in Celeste which I really like on that, in the sort of the easy to hard sort of tip, which is ironically in the part of the game that I like least. But there is a game where there is a part where you can branch off into 3 routes, and the stated aim is to unclutter this big central room by helping a ghost like put away stuff. At the end of every one of these 3 branching routes, there you basically get to turn off a particular kind of block, which means that depending on the order in which you play them, it will always get
Oh,
harder with every subsequent one you play because the type of block that you turned off will be absent, and therefore that will make certain jumps more difficult. meaning that there's always a steady ramp up of difficulty between the three ones, no matter which order you play them in, which I thought was a very neat trick.
That is a very neat trick.
And also like demonstrates that the people who made this game are, thinking critically about difficulty level, even in sort of minutiae.
I'm regarding this parking job with dread. I seem to remember getting this exact one in the past and it being a complete shit show.
Cool, we have some extra time. One thing that
why does the truck parking minigame not satisfy my difficulty tingles in the same way?
Because if you grasped how to do it, it wouldn't be hard.
That's probably right.
It's that you don't have a handle on the underlying mechanic.
No, I don't think that could be it, because that's also how getting over it works, and figuring that all out was a joy. Maybe it's that the feedback is too slow coming.
Yeah, it's not like if you had to do like a quick restart after every parking failure, that might you might know how to park a truck by this point.
James Howell says I'm good at parking trucks.
That's good. Well, I mean, in terms of
Thanks, James.
In terms of entertaining the audience, you're great at parking trucks. It's all about figuring out the utility.
This is a shit show, just like I knew it was gonna be.
Oh, but you're never gonna get anywhere with that attitude. I didn't get to talking at all about what Iconoclast is trying to do in its storytelling, but really, I don't. That may be a different story for a different time. This ended up being the Celeste / difficulty trucks.
Yeah.
We can save the rest of it for later. And anyway, it has now been long enough since I played the game that most of the thoughts that I've had about it have gone. It's that kind of game.
Sure.
Whereas Celeste will stick with me, partially because it's a very good integrated gameplay experience. Good music counts for a tremendous amount in terms of remembering what a game is about.
It's so quick. Like, a game that makes me turn off its music is a game that's most likely not going to stick with me as well.
Yep, that is an unfortunate reality. And I can't remember a single piece of music from Iconoclast. Oh well.
Nightmare. Oh my god, what a nightmare. I can't skip the parking job in the trucks about this kind of thing.
No.
That would be cowardice.
Which, brings me to Trucks Hard Mode, i.e. Trying to keep up the discourse single-handedly while you're struggling here.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's an all-consuming process, this.
Mm-hmm.
What were you about to ask?
Oh, nothing. I was considering opening the can of worms about whether Bennett Foddy is exclusionary again, just to see if you've... I kind of pissed you off about that by accident the last time that we tried to record this.
It was when you called the people who like it, what was it, egotistical?
Yes. Which I think that you may have annoyed you because you thought that I wasn't including myself in that category.
I would still find it mildly annoying even knowing that. I think
that there's a certain element to getting good at the hard game, which is inherently about your ego, whereas you construe the process of interacting with difficulty as a kind of ego death.
The truth is that a lot of people are attracted to hard games for ego-driven reasons, but I think it's a mistake to paint them with a brush according to that. That's the audience, not the work talking, in my opinion.
Well, I mean,
and it's only one section of the audience. You know what I mean?
I mean, surely Foddy.
I'm never gonna do this. It's
interacts
impossible.
with that part of the.
He does interact with it for sure.
Interact with that intentionally. So, like, he's at the very least addressing that that portion of the audience in making the game. And like, my contention essentially was that he doesn't really escape that, even though there's sort of this idea that he has, which but that's.
I don't think he escapes it, but I do think he successfully shows how there can be more to it than that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that I'll agree with. I mean, he's certainly all about, like, you know, showcasing that there are, you know, a lot of different aspects to the, you know, to the creation of it. And, like, I think that one of the choices that, I mean, I think that probably one of the more interesting things that he has to say as you're getting over it is about how he himself was unable to control how difficult he was making the game.
Right.
That he began to judge himself the way a player might judge themselves immediately upon thinking that he should make things less cruel.
Right.
And, you know, I think that's revealing in a certain way, like, about the obverse of ego, like about where that kind of that pridefulness comes from is the sense of inadequacy. What are you doing here? Look at this.
I think I might have cracked the code.
Holy mackerel, bro! I knew that you could integrate your shadow if you just stuck to it long enough. The part of me that says that I can't park this truck, I should hit the skip button. It's trying to protect you by showing you where the skip button is.
This truck's needed to be an extra 5 minutes long anyway.
Absolutely.
It was a short one. In the same breath as saying that Bennett Foddy was judging himself that way, he also says that he felt that reducing the difficulty of these obstacles he created would be to infringe upon the truth of them in some way, which is also very interesting.
It is. I mean,
Did it.
You did it. I knew you could, and the parking button worked.
Yes, we did it. Everything was satisfactory.
Miracle of miracles. There we go. I mean, I think that this truck worked on both a narrative level and a structural level to underline the points that we were trying to make, and that's really the greatest success that we can ask for.
I'm so glad.
This Trucks was true. It was
a true Trucks. We didn't infringe upon the truth of it at all.
No. We
Great.
Got out of the way and let it be what it needed to be.
Okay, that's that. Trucks. Please subscribe to the new channel.
Absolutely.
I think we'll probably put one more. We won't put. I don't think I'm going to put another full Trucks episode on the old channel. I think I'm going to put a reminder video or two for the next couple of episodes, and then that'll be it.
Sounds reasonable.
So everybody knows. And I'm excited about season 3 of Trucks. We got more tricks up our sleeve. These have just been a couple of. These have been very standard trucks, but we got some stuff coming. I think. I hope.
I do too. I have very little control over that.
All right.
I do too. All right.
Good night,
buddies.
Truckos.
See you later.